Hello, welcome. My name's Sam Plager, and today we're going to be discussing environmental philosophy, which is a branch of philosophical thinking that questions humanity's place within the natural environment. The discipline has continuously evolved since its origin in the 1970s, ranging in focus from various constructs such as sacredness, dualism, patriarchy, and ecosystemic equality. This video will cover an important development within environmental philosophy, the incorporation of phenomenology. First and foremost, phenomenology is concerned with individuals' direct experience with their surrounding world, and how those experiences can be similar while simultaneously very different from one another. In Janet Donahoe's essay, Towards a Phenomenology of Nature, she applies Edmund Husserl's terms life world, home world, and alien world to our understanding of nature and the environment. Life world is the world perceived by humans, but it is not the same as the objective world as is often thought about in the sciences. The life world is ever-changing and subjective, and heavily influenced by factors such as time, history, technology, and geography. The home world is basically an individual or group's unique perspective in relation to their local environment, and each individual or group's home world is just a small part of the broader life world. Janet Donahoe describes this idea by using the analogy of an ant on an orange. Because the ant is so small, it cannot perceive the entirety of the orange, but merely a portion of its surface at a given time. This holds true for humans and the Earth. And because of the environmental variability of the Earth, it can be challenging for humans to recognize the manner in which environmental perspectives can change in relation to where in the world the individual lives. Factors such as typical weather patterns, sounds from a nearby highway, and simply one's own morning routine all end up making up the home world. Donahoe also describes a push and pull relationship, where the perception of the life world is ultimately defined by our existence and our perspective in the home world. Conversely, the life world is the ultimate basis for the home world. In this view, any perspective that is not defined by the home world and sits outside of it is considered the alien world. Notice how these two worlds combine to create the whole that is the life world. It is important to note, however, that the home world and alien world share similarities in terms of physical boundary and location in historical time. Recognizing the relation of these worlds is important, according to Donahoe, as the life world can only be understood through the recognition of both the alien and home worlds. We need a personal home world in order to be able to experience something alien and recognize it as such. If we are unable to recognize the specificities of our individual home worlds, it can become easy to think that one's home world speaks for the entirety of the life world, when in reality, the home world is just a small, specific part of the plethora of perspectives that make up the entire world. The concept of ecological restoration can be quite problematic. In Martin Drenthen's article, Ecological Restoration and Place Attachment, he argues that climate change has forced humanity to approach the environment from a managerial perspective. This sort of relationship with the land can destroy histories and strip away the meaning that allows people to connect with it, creating non-places devoid of identity. Drenthen specifically discusses the Netherlands as an example of government-imposed restoration for the purpose of water management and the consequences for local residents. The Netherlands decided to implement new policies regarding management of riverbeds for the purpose of ecologically sound, robust nature reserves to improve spatial quality. But the result was unhappy local residents who felt the changes altered the fundamental experience and interpretations of the land along the river, some even saying they lost their sense of belonging. This perceived decline in place attachment is correlated with the fact that contemporary policy centers functionality over infused meanings of landscapes. Terms like spatial quality and sense of place are typically seen as subjective feelings and not prioritized in the creation of governmental policy. A similar conflict is found between indigenous communities and consumer-motivated developers, who both understand the land and its value in incredibly different ways. Drenton believes that we should be able to reconcile these phenomenological conflicts by recognizing the importance of place-based existence. As you continue watching, consider how people derive their meaning from the natural landscape around them, and the ways that both ecological and economic policy can neglect this reality.
I'm getting word that it's time for a quick turtle break. I think that's enough. Back to the video.
For many people around the world, landscape is an important part of identity, and identity is an important part of landscape. Irene J. Klaver's essay, Authentic Landscapes at Large, Dutch Globalization and Environmental Imagination, considers the Dutch landscape as an example of how our landscapes are intertwined with identity. The Dutch have changed their environment quite a bit as different crops have been more profitable as years go by. Specifically, they have changed their clay soils to sandy soils to grow tulips, which have become more profitable. Klaver points out that to fully understand the Dutch relationship with the landscape, you have to understand their 500-year history of building and rebuilding. While the profit of tulips has been economically beneficial, the nature around has been paying the price. Heavy use of pesticides needed to kill the tulip-eating bugs have caused the air and water to become toxic. This has astronomically affected the insects and has therefore killed off other animals. Despite the fact that tulips are not native to the Netherlands, they remain an important part of the national identity. Overall, Klaver's philosophy calls for a holistic ethical approach to environmental issues, which considers both cultural and ecological values when it comes to policy and practice. Alright. At this point, I know, you might be thinking, phenomenology, place-based existence, life world, blah blah blah. What is even the point of all of this philosophical nonsense? The planet is on fire, the ozone has like a hole in it or something. The tigers are dying. Around 50 years ago, India began seeing its tiger population decreasing. In response, numerous wildlife preserves were created throughout the country with the introduction of Project Tiger in 1973. The project has managed to bring the tiger population back to above 3,000, which is 75% of the global tiger population today. However, it has also brought about significant controversy regarding the treatment of indigenous communities. Heavily influenced by American environmentalism, the designation of preservation areas has led to the displacement of many indigenous groups who have lived on the land for centuries. There are two major issues with this resettlement process. One being that it interferes with many indigenous groups' sacred view of their surrounding nature. Communities that demonstrate this sacred viewpoint praise tigers as gods and custodians of the forest, and living together with the beasts is a great honor to them. The second issue lies within populations that do not have this sacred view of the tiger, but still greatly rely on their surrounding land through forms of livestock raising and agriculture for economic benefit. Upon declaration of the Mudamalai Tiger Reserve, the Forest Department has limited the number of permitted livestock holdings per household and restricted grazing activity. This was very much needed from an ecological perspective, as the frequent presence, rearing, and overgrazing of livestock in the reserve by local inhabitants from villages such as Moyar, Chemanathan, and Mazinagudi pose a real threat to the health of the ecosystem. Due to the close proximity between preserved wilderness and these communities, elephant and tiger populations were still observed trampling cropland and consuming livestock. The negative attitudes that this invoked among locals led to retaliation against wildlife, which continued to degrade the ecosystem that was trying to be saved. Historically, nature preserves in India have forced resettlement upon these communities without providing them the amenities needed to sustain themselves in a new setting. Resettlement has frequently left people deprived of quality land, created violent conflict between officials and ethnic groups, and induced poverty and marginalization. This is a trend that can also be seen around the world in places such as Central and South America, Latin America, and China, despite the fact that the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Worldwide Fund for Nature clearly state that biodiversity conservation should be achieved in an ethical manner. Through an interview of 374 different households, totaling to 2,237 total individuals among ethnic groups in India such as the Paniyas and Irulas, general consensus was developed regarding the impacts of tiger preservation areas. Due to suffering high livestock loss from carnivores like the tiger and crop damage from elephants, 74% of respondents demonstrated interest in resettlement, as long as basic amenities could be provided to them. However, there exists a large number of people who still experience low incidences of conflict from tigers and elephants, and in order to support the fluctuating needs of local communities, park authorities can and should opt for choice-based resettlement, allowing people to decide whether they want to stay in their homes in the preservation area or take part in a resettlement process, which might offer them new opportunities. Having a choice in the matter is especially important for tribes such as the Jinu Kuruba, who are losing access to their ancestral lands and traditional livelihoods due to forced resettlement. The homeland of Nagarhole was one of the first forests to be brought under Project Tiger back in the 70s. J.A. Shavu, a member of the Jinu Kuruba, states, "Our parents and grandparents were probably among the first to be forced out of the forests in the name of conservation. We have lost all rights to visit our lands, temples, or even collect honey from the forests. How can we continue to live like this?" The Jinu Kuruba tribe was a primary contributor to the establishment of the Nagarhole Adivasi Forest Rights Establishment Committee, which was formed to protest these evictions and voice their concerns on how these forests are managed. The committee cites several instances of forest used actively by local communities in which tiger populations have actually increased despite the fact that people are there living off the land. The Mount Chedis, Katunakers, Kurumbas, and other communities negatively impacted by the establishment of preservation areas demonstrated interest in resettlement options as long as they were supported with amenities such as access to electricity, housing, water, healthcare, schools, transportation, and communication. Most of these villages do not have amenities such as public transportation, hospitals, and schools, and relocation could greatly benefit their well-being if these are provided. The provision of these amenities has great potential to reduce conflict, decrease poaching or hunting, reduce the impacts of livestock grazing on the environment, and enhance recovery of wildlife. For those unwilling to resettle, more sustainable utilization of certain resources within or adjacent to a preservation area may be permitted by the local forest department. They will also need to take extra precautions to minimize livestock depredation from large carnivores. The Forest Department can implement mechanisms such as predator-proof designs for livestock and sheds to limit livestock loss from wild carnivores. In addition, locals that stay might be inclined toward wildlife conservation when they receive some direct income benefit from tourism or employment from preserve management and operations. A successful settlement plan should also consider the environmental conditions of the prospective resettlement site, the types of sustainable activities possible there, and long-term commitments that need to be honored. For communities dependent on agriculture, the quality of the new land in terms of its fertility and availability of water are important factors. For communities dependent on livestock, the availability of grazing lands and fodder is an absolute necessity. The concerned families should be aware of the conservation imperatives that require resettlement, and forest officials should show to the local communities a range of potential new sites for resettlement. Based on their choice, an agreement should be signed between officials and the families mentioning all the provisions in the resettlement package. This is possible if the Forest Department closely works with local non-government organizations and relevant agencies that would monitor the rehabilitation process of the resettled families for the long term. In conclusion, tigers are apex predators that play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of the ecosystems that they inhabit. The writing of Irene J. Claver emphasizes the interconnectedness of natural systems and the importance of viewing tiger preservation holistically as the securing of the health of an entire ecosystem. Effective tiger conservation must consider not just the tigers themselves, but also the preservation of forests, rivers, and the other wildlife that make up their habitat. Ensuring a healthy ecosystem is also a surefire way of supporting the livelihoods and well-being of local communities. Unfortunately, making this idea something that is universally agreed upon is rather complex. Policies tend to prohibit the use of natural resources by local communities, while simultaneously ignoring local people's dependencies on these natural resources, their social and cultural traditions, as well as the perspectives on local wildlife. The range of attitudes toward tiger preservation in India perfectly demonstrate Janet Donahoe's concept of the life world. It is important to consider the various homeworlds and alien worlds that make up the lived experiences and subjective realities of all stakeholders. For example, local farmers might view tigers and the wildlife that accompany them as a threat to their livestock and cropland, with their preservation coming hand in hand with the loss of their economic stability and well-being. On the other hand, in many other parts of India, tigers hold cultural and spiritual significance and contribute greatly to what Martin Drenthen would call a sense of place. They feature prominently in their folklore, religions, and traditions, where they exist as symbols of power, bravery, and beauty. Preserving them is not just about conserving an endangered species, but also about maintaining the cultural heritage and identity that they represent. In these areas where tigers are present and highly valued, communities may have traditional knowledge and practices that contribute to their sustainable coexistence with wildlife. Engaging these communities in tiger conservation efforts fosters a sense of stewardship and ensures that conservation strategies are culturally relevant and effective. Bridging these perceptual gaps requires engaging with the homeworld of each group, understanding their concerns, and incorporating their perspectives into conservation policies, so that the identities of many communities are not lost in the process. Impactful challenges in conservation governance should always be assessed by the local communities through surveys and interviews, especially when these challenges come into conflict with the community's lifestyles. When worlds collide, conflict arises. But when we understand the world as containing many different worlds, this allows us to develop environmental policy that is more graceful, holistic, inclusive, and ultimately more successful. Effective conservation in India is not just about protecting tigers, but also about understanding and integrating the complex web of human experiences and relationships that surround tiger habitats. Solving the many environmental issues of our time will be an incredibly daunting task. Between fossil fuels, plastic pollution, and the sixth mass extinction, we environmentalists have a lot cut out for us. If you can take anything away from today, let it be this. Tackling the varied environmental issues of our time is going to require many different solutions from the many worlds that exist on our planet. Phenomenology helps us acknowledge the complexity of existences on our planet and will be incredibly important as we move forward. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.